Hi, Facebook friends. As always, thanks for joining me. This week, we're going to continue looking at the fruit of the Spirit as written about by Paul in Galatians chapter 5. Today's word is faithfulness and what that might mean. A bunch of months ago, I talked about being faithful to God's calling upon our lives and He would bring the results. And I shared some accounts about that. Well, today I want to talk about faithfulness in our day-to-day living and what it might look like. I'm going to embarrass myself and tell you about an account that I'm ashamed of, quite honestly, where I wasn't faithful to my word and to what I would share with someone. So anyway, let's begin. Just turn the clock back 25 years or so. I have a neighbor who has all kind of tools and stuff, and he said, "Hey, if you ever need anything, Blake, just ask, borrow, and so forth." And so I did, and what I borrowed from Mr. Hershey was a limb lopper with a long pole, and you pull the rope, and it lops off smaller branches way up high and so forth. Well, I borrowed it, and he went away for the day, and he said, "Hey, just put it back in the garage." And as I was clipping limbs, and I was doing the small ones like you're supposed to, and they came off great and all, then I got this idea that I could take off bigger limbs, and I tried to do one, and it snapped the end of the blade. And blades cost about $9, so there's no big deal that way. But I can't even explain why. I to this day have no idea why I did this. I took the limb trimmer and put it back in his garage like I said I would, and I laid the broken piece of the blade on top of it. And I don't know if Mr. Hershey ever realized how that happened, remembered who he'd given it to, and how that took place, or I don't know. It was never spoken of. I know they moved from their home across from us to a different home, and so I know they moved their stuff. I knew somebody found out and all, but it was funny how I put out I put it back and I'll talk to him, blah, blah, blah. But I never did. I just never did. And I can't, again, explain that. I don't know why. But I certainly wasn't faithful about my word. I'll put it back and unspoken, you put it back either better than it was or the way it was. And I just never did that. And whilst preaching at Wesley Church one Sunday, this all came rushing back to me years later. Now, the Hersheys had moved. In fact, Mr. Hershey had passed away. And this all came rushing back to me that I never made that right. I was never faithful about that. And I thought, what can I do with that? And so what I did, his daughter, Joyce, and son-in-law, Al, are friends of mine. And I thought, you know what? I know what I'm going to do. And so I went to the house, and they probably thought, well, I'm not sure what they thought, but it was years later. This is like 15 years after the fact. And I took $20 with me, and I said to Joyce and Al, I said, I want you to know, and I told them the story I just told you. I said, but the Lord, in the middle of my message, would not let me settle. And I want to give you this $20, which was basically the price of 2 blades, which I thought was just fair after all those years. And they were so kind and gracious. He said, Blake, it's okay. It wasn't, but it wasn't for me okay at that point. And I said, I want you to have this. And he said, why don't you do this? Why don't you take this and put it in the offering plate, and someone else will get helped by it. So because of their kindness, I said, yeah, okay, that's what I'll do. But I wanted you to know, I want you to know. And some of you might be sitting there going, well, why make such a big deal about this? Well, the big deal about it, and some of you might say, "Ooh, I can't believe, Blake, you did that." Well, I think my biggest thing is God calls us to faithfulness, to be men and women of our word, that when we say we're going to do something, we do it, be faithful, to do the right thing that He's called us to. If we say we're going to be there at a certain time, we ought to be there. If we say we're going to pay somebody back, we ought to pay them back. If we say we're going to help out, we need to go help out. And so, I just knew I'd really messed that up. But the bigger reason, I think, is because my testimony as a believer, in this case, I was a pastor even, my testimony, I fumbled. I I just wasn't faithful to what I knew and believed. And God calls us, he calls us to be faithful. He calls us to be faithful in our marriages, in our relationship with friends and those around us. That if our friend has need, if we're faithful, we help them out. What if they've stumbled and fallen? What if they've done things that are really outside God's will? We can discard them, but I thought we were called to be faithful and to lovingly come around those folks that may have struggled. I think we're called to be faithful to the time God gives us, to the talents he gives us, to be faithful to even the money that we have, because being faithful in our giving, being faithful in using our time wisely for the kingdom. And I bet some of you have been like me too. Not only did we maybe not do the right thing, but sometimes we just do the lazy thing, and our time gets away from us, and we can't believe we wasted that much time. I'm not sure there's too much sadder than at the journey as we look back and we go someday, boy, I shoulda, boy, I coulda, I wish I woulda. And so being faithful takes care of those things if we are faithful along those lines as well. So anyway, today I know I'm a little more brief than normal, but I just want to let you know that God calls us in Galatians to be faithful, to do what we say we're going to do, to be faithful to his word and to his calling upon our lives, because there's a world watching. There's a world watching to see how we are going to handle those things. The last thing about that, not only our testimony and our witness, but here's what I found, that every time I'm faithful, God's blessing comes. And every time I'm faithful, I sense his presence more and more. Even when it's hard, even when it's difficult, even when we're embarrassed, let's be faithful. I pray you have a great week in Jesus. I pray that as we look at love and joy and peace, that you might be blessed in the coming weeks, and you'll join me then as well. God bless. May his hand be upon you.